Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our panel webinar during West Island School Mental Health Week. This year, our focus is to tune in and connect around the 5 ways to wellbeing. Each day, tutors and staff will discuss reasons why, techniques and tools to tune in, to connect, be active, keep learning and offer service. So today, students connected with a panel of mental health professionals answering their questions, and we're pleased to host this webinar for you this evening and where our panel will answer yours. So our panel this evening, I'm really pleased to welcome Dr. Scarlett Mattoli, a psychologist and psychotherapist at Psynamo, Dr. Keith Harriman, a psychiatrist at OT&P, Dr. Michael Eason, a psychologist and therapist at Lifespan Counselling, and Stephanie Young, an educationalist and counsellor at Central Health Medical Practice. So we've received some great questions and we hope the next 50 minutes you find it interesting and insightful. So let's begin.
Saffron, I'm going to turn my camera off, but if parents do have questions during this session, they're very welcome to pop them in the Q&A below, and I'll be behind the scenes and I'll let you know if we have any at the end. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So first question that came in, are you seeing an impact on well-being given the extended restrictions, and how can parents support students' mental health whilst online learning?
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I have the privilege actually of being in a school setting and the private clinic environment as well. So I certainly get to see both sides of what is happening right now. And some students are managing fine. There are definitely some that are struggling, and they're struggling in all aspects, all pillars of wellness. Their physical, their intellectual, of course, emotional, everything. So I think that the most important thing to recognize as a parent is we collectively, I'm also a parent, we need to manage our expectations, especially around academic performance. From the school side of things, we're adapting and we're trying to manage and adjust our expectations. And I think for a lot of you who are seeing these changes at home with your adolescent who may be struggling, it's time to adapt, right? And so some of the practical things that we can do, include conversation, right? Ask them what they need. Serve as a consultant, especially through these adolescent years. On a physical wellness aspect, sit down with them and build a daily schedule that includes exercise, healthy eating, time away from the screen. There's something that happens physically to these young people that we call Zoom fatigue. I am not a doctor, but something physically happens to our bodies over the course of the day. So help them get off the screen and model that behavior with them. I think the study schedule is a great way that you can work with them to model some of these sort of proactive sort of life skills, help them understand that they need to balance their day and really just be available to them, affirm that disappointment that they're feeling. There's some kind of grief that seems to be occurring with some students over missing out on rites of passage. So being available and allowing them to be vulnerable and validate these feelings could be something really beneficial. I think the last thing that's important to note is trying to be as engaged and aware of changes in them, right? In their mood. Are they withdrawing? Are you seeing different changes in behaviors? Is the sleep changing so much that something is happening? So being engaged and aware gives you that, handle on what's happening with them, and allows for you to try to connect. And if that void is too vast, if they are too withdrawn, that's when you can seek some external support. So, but the biggest thing, manage your expectations because there is an impact on their wellness right now.
Thanks for that. Anything in addition from anyone else? Great. Next question, which probably builds on that a little bit then. So how can we support students managing uncertainty?
Yeah, I think this is the biggest piece. And Stephanie, just following on, I think that's great advice. I think the parents really have to listen and hear their children, and then understand that they're experiencing the same thing. And it's hard to be the leader when you don't really have a full grasp on everything either. And as parents, I think we do worry about managing that uncertainty, but sometimes being alongside them and letting them know, yeah, this is tough. what can we do? And coming up with that positive list, as you said, those daily activities. Well, what are we going to do and what did we do? And being a little bit more affirming about what can happen and what we know. And sometimes that, you're right, it taps into a lovely part of our brain that lets us know, I'm okay. I did do something. I did connect with another human. I did get my exercise or fresh air or something else. And then part of that meditation, mindfulness bent, some people like it more than others, but that present moment awareness, it's more empowering than people realize. And when we're uncertain about something, saying what's happening here and now is pretty good. It can be reaffirming. It can certainly help us engage with the process that we have to do. I don't know what's happening next, but I know that I have to do X now. Okay, at least I'm going to do this one with fidelity. Yeah, but I know Michael, Stephanie, Keith, Calvin, you've all got a lot of this going on as well. What kind of things have you guys seen coming up?
We have had a comment in the chat as well about actually getting students away from their screens. So how do you lure the students away from their screens during these times of uncertainty or during these times of online learning, etc.?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think because you have to remember what you do frequently, you get pretty good at. Okay, and what they're doing most hours of the day now is being online. So they're pretty good at being online, believe it or not, even if they have Zoom fatigue and everything else. And we haven't been rehearsing the other things, getting out and walking and doing other things and getting our reward pathway to fire off for them. So we've gotten out of the habit of knowing that those things can feel good too. So I think Stephanie was absolutely right. Get your child, take that walk together, model the behavior you'd like to see is probably the most powerful piece. Because just telling them get off and then going off to the other room to check on your Twitter feed, less powerful. Yeah, so I think it is about that. And then giving them positive options. I always say have your best menu of 8 available somewhere in the house. And that can include things like read a book, learn to knit, practice your language, do your guitar. But it can also do things like find a new recipe and let's work at it for the weekend. Let's find a new hike to go on if you can get out, simple things. They don't really have to be complicated. I think, yeah. But that's away from screen time.
I mean, I suppose, hi everyone, Keith, I suppose that echoing Scarlett's comments just then, COVID restrictions allowing, I think another thing that we can do to lure students out of the screen is to actually schedule meetups with their classmates or parents or study together. I mean, of course, this is all COVID restrictions allowing. If the case numbers are lower, for example, then hopefully they'll understand that the joy of meeting someone in person and talking to them in person is far greater than just, talking about Discord or Instagram or WhatsApp or something. So I think that's something that we can also arrange or encourage kids to do, to relearn the joy of meeting people in person and interacting with them, not just online, but also face-to-face.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that's a really good point, kind of relearning things that we might have started to lose, the joy of just being together. The next question is a little bit of a change in direction, but my child makes comments about not wanting to be here and not seeing the point in living. Are these suicidal thoughts? How serious should I take them?
Well, I think, first of all, I'm very sorry to hear that your child is experiencing something like that. I mean, I think as a parent, seeing this in your child must be extremely devastating thing to see. To answer that question, I think it's hard to say whether or not they're suicidal thoughts directly, because I don't have the additional context. But just hearing words like, not wanting to be here doesn't necessarily mean that this is a suicidal thought. So for example, it could mean I don't want to be here studying online. I don't want to be here just spending all day Zoom, which is quite tiring, quite boring, of course. And not seeing the point of living, it could just be that the child is asking for help, asking that I don't see the point of just sitting here in front of a computer screen and learning and not interacting with other people. So I can't say for sure whether or not these are suicidal thoughts directly, but I think what is more clear is that this is actually a sign to call for help, whether this is from parents or from teachers or from others. This is a sign that this child is clearly not feeling very good and has some struggles in life that he or she might want to be addressed or get help from. So my advice to you on that point would be to talk to your child. And, I've say, for example, to the child saying, I see that you've made this comment, are you okay? What's been happening? What do you mean by you don't want to be here? What do you mean by no point in living? What's happening recently or what's happening lately? Just talk to them and understand them a bit more, learn more about them. And I think that opens doors to a whole new conversation as well.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that one?
Hello, everyone. Hi. Thanks, Keith. That was a good response. I just want to jump on that bandwagon and, to say that parents oftentimes are a bit hesitant to bring up the topic. They fear this idea that they may be putting that idea into their heads to talk about suicide or to talk about self-harm. But actually, the communication is so imperative that they can have a normalized discussion about that. To kind of dig into those thoughts. What exactly did you mean when you said this? And let's talk about it and kind of normalize the experience. Because by talking about suicide, you're not encouraging it or kind of giving them an idea that they didn't already think about. So I think, having that kind of an open dialogue is really important. And the other thing that you're looking at in terms of the severity of it is sort of, your child better than anyone else. And is this sort of behavior is sort of a very drastic change from their how they have been previously. And so looking at that, it can very often be a sign to us that it is a cry for help.
And just again, jumping on bandwagon after what Michael said, and there's actually been a lot of research about this point, whether or not talking about suicidal thoughts actually increases suicidality. It's actually, some people think about that it does, they worry that it increases such, you're planting ideas into their brains, but actually, there's actually been a lot of research on this. As far back as 2014, even recently in the British Journal of Psychiatry, and says that there's actually no evidence to suggest that talking about suicidality implants ideas or increases the risk of suicidality as well. And so therefore, I think if this does actually appear, the best thing is just to talk to the kids and to understand what is happening with them.
I think that's so true. If I can just add the classic statistic, 50% of the population will think everything is too much for them at some point. Yeah, so it's okay to just let that be normalized. I think that is so critical. And that talking about anything that's too big is always worthwhile. Keeping it in your head makes it bigger than it is. And that's the most unsafe place to keep it. Yeah.
Thank you. And our next question is, my child is questioning their gender, or is it their sexuality? This is all new to me. How can I help?
Speaking of big topics that you don't want to keep in your head, I'm just going to note that I am offering a full-length webinar in this in a couple of weeks. So this is a really abridged, brief response, but the big thing here is we need to remember that these are different aspects of one's identity, and both exist on a continuum or a spectrum that can change over a lifetime. So, questioning one is not psychologically abnormal, right? And neither require professional help necessarily, right? This is not something that we need to pathologize and be really worried about. But I understand that if your child comes to you and this is new, it can be a little bit unnerving. It's difficult territory to walk through, especially when you are living with an adolescent who has a language that is so unfamiliar to you that it's foreign, right? So I think the most important thing to do first is just reflect on your own background, your own biases. What does this information provoke in you, right? So that you can have a conversation with your child, so that you can separate your own feelings from those of your child, right? And take your time, because we know how hard it is to take back things that are said that are harmful. When you get to that point where you can have a conversation, we want to make sure that our tone is curious, not one that is interrogating. Open-ended questions are fantastic, right? I'm curious about blank. I wonder blank. If your child is experimenting with different labels that they're trying out, ask them, right? What does being non-binary mean to you? Right? Anything that is open-ended and isn't backing them into a corner is a really great way to keep the home safe and open, right? That's the one environment that you can control. And we want to be leading with love, not fear. I think it's really important, and I hear this a lot from parents, because I am working with a fairly large population of young kids that are questioning these aspects of identity. This is not a trend. Statistically, there's some increase in numbers of kids that are experiencing this. This is both aspects of identity have been this forever, right? So no one is choosing not to conform, especially an adolescent. This isn't a choice. They're consciously waking up in the morning and saying, hey, I want to be different. I want to be different, and I want to feel challenged by this. This is not a trend, and your reception of it is so important. I have so much to say about this. I don't know, maybe if anyone else wants to piggyback on the topic, I'd be happy to share.
I think it's really gorgeous that you say, parents, listen, hear, be aware, ask questions, be curious, because the one thing we know, the task of adolescents is to take risks and to suppress all safety behavior. So the whole job is just to figure out what's the whole diaspora of options, and I'll decide when I'm 18 which one I'm actually going to choose. So having flexibility and patience with that testing and failure process it's unnerving. As a parent of 3 teens, I know it personally. Yeah, it could be truly challenging, and even I get it wrong lots of times. But the times that I can think, be calm, and just ask, how does it help you to explore that? I found that they tell me more, or they get less angry with me, which is just a good response too.
I think Stephanie can perhaps correct me with my statistics. I was looking into this a few years ago. The prevalence of gender dysphoria, which is basically people not identifying with their own assigned gender at birth. The presence of gender dysphoria in childhood persisting into adulthood is around 60-23%. Something maybe, the statistics might change depending on which studies you look at, but I think what it means is that if a child is questioning their gender at this point, it doesn't necessarily mean that this will persist into adulthood. I think that's the main point of what that statistic is trying to say. I think what's important is just for them to understand, for you to understand what they're going through, what is happening, and there's no need to panic or be super anxious immediately. It's more about understanding and talking to them as well. I know the numbers might vary, but I think that's the main gist of it.
And I think the onset of puberty for a lot of young people is significant too, because the changes in their body in terms of gender are so visible and so pressing, and so present that often will change those that sort of understanding of self, right? But it seems that there's this immediate concern with parents that the worries about, again, talking about gender, body modification, all these great fears about hormone therapies and surgery, and we need to separate that from your child's understanding of themselves, right, and what they're going through, and not jumping right to that conclusion right away. There's so many different paths that kids who are adolescents who are questioning their gender are on that we don't want to conflate all of your own concerns with theirs. So
I will say, if I can jump in, I'll say, it's important for parents to do the work and to understand a little bit about the difference in the vocabulary here with gender versus sexuality, because oftentimes it's conflated. And as we mentioned earlier about having that safe space at home. So even before a child or an adolescent starts questioning gender or sexuality, that maybe in the home you're mindful of what language you use and how you speak about sexuality and how you speak about gender, what kind of terminology you use in the home. Because I've worked with a lot of teenagers who feel uncomfortable speaking with their parents because their parents have expressed views that may give them the idea that their parents will not accept them if they talk about feeling having a different gender or having some sort of different sexual orientation. And so I think just even preemptively, like setting the tone to let them know that it's a safe space, that they're loved and accepted. In this part of, again, like we said earlier about normalizing that talking about something doesn't put the idea in their head. You're not going to have a conversation about gender non-binary and they're going to wake up tomorrow and be gender non-binary. So I think, again, opening that dialogue and having that conversation, and like you mentioned earlier, checking in on your own biases, and so, you know, the teenagers and the children discussing these things is a wonderful opportunity for us as adults to kind of, for our own personal growth as well. So just wanted to mention a little bit about that safe space.
No, I think that's great. Thank you very much. And the next question is pertinent with exam season on the horizon. So when does normal teen stress become a problem?
I think I'll contribute to this as well. And we kind of mentioned this earlier when we're talking about changes in behavior for a child. Again, you know your kid and you know your child, and what we're really looking for is very significant changes in how they cope and sort of their behavior, even basic changes in terms of their sleep schedule, their appetite. I know this is increasingly difficult in these COVID times when the restrictions and everything's online and things have been topsy-turvy. Maybe their bedtime has been extended by 2 hours or something like that. So we just want to look at kind of, if you know the baseline for how they typically manage stress, and the things tend to be sliding a little bit. Of course, there are other behaviors such as sort of maybe isolating more or becoming more moody at home, more irritable or even aggressive. And it can be difficult to disentangle some of this from just typical adolescent angst. And this is part of the question, right? So typical adolescent angst versus, so is this a problem? Is this something that's pathological perhaps in my own child? And as we've mentioned, you know, addressing it, you know, and having a conversation about it in a way that's not punitive, but also to say, as we've mentioned, about this curiosity. And hey, I've just noticed that you've been a bit more, you know, isolated lately. Is this something you'd like to talk about, or can we have a discussion about this? And I'm concerned, or something like that, but not in any kind of punitive way. So that's just the ideas off the top of my head. If anyone has any other perspectives.
Okay, great. So our next question, and I know Michael and Scarlett, you've done webinars and worked with students with this in the past. So we have touched on it briefly, but the question is, my child's life is increasingly online, gaming, social media, and now school again. How can we build family connection?
I think we were talking about earlier, maybe it was Scarlett, I think, who was mentioning about sort of having those schedule and those activities. So retraining the reward system for how we can remember to have fun, again, doing things that are not online, and something when we're able and safe to go on hikes, maybe just do it in groups of two, that's okay. Having family night, board games, right? Something interactive, more of the kind of the old school, sitting around and playing a board game, not doing the online. I notice many kids these days are doing some of the games we would play as kids, but they're doing them online, and there's an interactive component to that, and there's a social component to being online. And we can't take away the online life, but we still need to balance it with some of the IRL, right? The in real life, as like to use their lingo, the in real life activities that you can do together as a family. And I think other people have a lot to say about this as well, because I mainly work with teenagers. So if anyone has any other.
And looking at that that sort of increasing time online, I think we had touched on that before, but also gaming, social media, everything collapsing into a flat screen, and we've lost all of our 7D connections. We also have to remember that for all the research that I've reviewed in the last 10 years worth, and looking at what's happening to our brain, we can see that some of the structures are changing in individuals, and not just students. Okay, so we've got that 18 to 25-year-old bracket that started using it a bit early, and it's actually changing some of the connections to the amygdala, and then onto the reward pathway. So we have less ability to go for reward and less ability to suppress when we're getting excited about something. So, I mean, I'm not saying that's happening to everyone, but we do have to consider that the whole of life changing to more digital, more device-driven world means that we are having to, adapt to it and respond in a certain way. So at a certain level, anyone who's over 35 Your brain is lovely and sealed up, and it has old-fashioned mechanisms. Yeah, and the younger kids, they have different, faster, more well-oiled machinery that works for different purposes. I can guarantee you the sensitivity on the end of their fingertips is probably increased. Yeah, more neurons devoted to that area. But we also have to think about what are the knock-on effects of emotional regulation. And that, again, that is not just teenagers. We do have to think that, yeah, they're missing a lot of stuff that we take for granted as adults. And then there's the learning that happens in teen years that your brain just cuts away loads of those connections. It's called pruning. So we forget how tough it is to make these decisions. So sometimes, yeah, we have to make family connections. And I agree, Michael, I think there's great old-fashioned stuff, doing quiz nights, going back to doing Pictionary. You don't need anything more technologically advanced than this in some instances, paper and a pen. Yeah, and everybody gets a piece, just to be fair. But, you know, as I said, it can be cooking together. It can be all kinds of things. Now, for the last 2 years, everyone has probably exhausted the options they've already considered. But why don't you challenge your kids? You make the game, you make the rules, some kind of new Jeopardy or something, and let the kids drive it. Yeah, I guarantee you, when my child wanted a puppy, I got a PowerPoint. So let them do the thinking sometimes. You don't have to be so creative. Oh, but just, yeah, I think it's connections. It's what you can do with them, not at them, on them, or to them. I think those will be the most powerful.
Thank you. Our next question is, I want my child to speak to someone, but they don't want to. What can I do?
Well, I think that one is a tricky one. You know, we do want consent and assent when we talk to anyone as professionals, and it is quite tricky. And I've had parents bring in their children against the child's will, and then we're surprised when the child clammed up, and then after 2 or 3 weeks said, this therapy is not doing anything for them. Yeah, I told you at the beginning it probably wasn't. So a lot of it is helping them understand that you have a concern, and if you've exhausted it as a parent, you know your child best. I agree with Michael on that statement. If it really is out of the ordinary, helping them understand that, look, other people have skills that I don't as your parent. Can you just talk to them one time? Let's just see. Because I think Stephanie said the other thing is there's got to be some really good energy between the two people. If they really don't get along, it's not the right therapist regardless of their skill set. Yeah, they really have to have a connection. So sometimes it is about, let's just explore. Yeah, rather than pushing your agenda, because you want them to talk to someone to fix something perhaps that they don't think is wrong. And as I said before, the task of teenagerhood is to take risks, and they do lots of flubs, and there's a lot of shame involved. And sometimes they just need the grace to go fail in their room, lick the wounds, and come back out tomorrow. And that doesn't need talking to someone. That actually needs a lot of privacy. So being clear about how it might help them, but getting it from their perspective. You know, just asking straight up. So look, I've noticed that you've changed your habits. You've been a bit more moody. I'm not sure what to do about it, but I know there's some other people that can. Shall I make an appointment for you? Something as simple and light as that can be more effective lots of times. But I know that you've all dealt with this. I'd love to hear other people's.
Yeah, and hi everyone. I'm Calvin, the school counselor at West Island School. So I just want to lead off to what Dr. Scarlett has said earlier as well. I think we at West Island School, our counseling service is offered to all students. And I think if you're concerned about your child, I think you can start by reaching out to your child's head of year or their tutors even, because the tutors and their head of year know your child really well. I think you can reach out to them and start with that. And obviously the counseling team, myself and Saffron, we're here to help as well, to be the bridge to start this conversation.
Thanks for that, Calvin. A student asked this afternoon about feeling low and lacking motivation. And the next parent question is, my teen seems low and flat. Is this normal for their age, or should I seek help?
I'll just start on this one because it sort of tails off from the previous one, just about their mood if you're noticing it. But that flatness and the lowness, I think it goes back to right now that we've all been online. And I think we've all noticed that our mood hasn't been as perky as we'd like it to be. So sometimes just sitting with your child and say, I'm feeling low today, how are you? And then sometimes just understanding we will feel that way someday. And I try to explain to people that we have a band, quite a wide band of homeostasis that our brain and body are trying to keep us balanced in. And we can ping all over the place the whole time. And most people have been pinging towards the lower part of the band over the last year. And it is quite tough, but we're not aiming to be happy all the time. And teens aren't all moody. So there's something in between those two bookends that we have to be flexible about looking for. If you really think that they are extraordinarily low right now, go ahead and let them know that you see it. I think we're still circling around these same conversations, but it's important to pull it out, offer them some kind of support. And you're the parent. If they really like having ice cream or a movie or a cuddle, maybe just ask if they'd like that to start with. Sometimes good old-fashioned stuff is your win.
Anyone else got anything to add on kind of that building and maintaining motivation for teens? What we will do is as well, we said for the young people this afternoon, we're going to send them out loads of resources in order to do that. So leading up to their exams and leading up to exam season for them. So the next question is, I think my child is self-harming. Why? And what can I do?
Hi, so I think I was assigned to answer this question. First about with the self-harm thing. I think the most important thing that people should know right from the beginning is that self-harm doesn't necessarily mean that they want to kill themselves. Sometimes people harming themselves might be because they want to seek help, or sometimes have this anguish within them, this mental and psychological distress within them that they cannot make sense of, and they don't know how to solve this. And so therefore, as a result, sometimes they think that harming themselves is actually more bearable than the mental anguish. And so therefore, that's why they harm themselves. But I just want to emphasize first that doesn't mean that they're trying to kill themselves. The most common places where people harm themselves sometimes usually by cutting themselves, although there are other ways such as overdosing. But if they cut themselves, one thing that we normally try to look for is sometimes around the arms, so around this area. Usually they use the dominant hand, so usually the other side. Sometimes people also harm themselves in places where it cannot be easily seen, such as on the thighs or near the waist area, so that even if you're wearing bikinis, for example, you can still cover the marks. So there are multiple reasons I want to mention why someone harm themselves. But I think the most important thing that we can do is, again, if this is happening, trying to understand what's happening and trying to understand what kind of problems the person is going through. It's not very often that people would harm themselves without experiencing a related emotional distress. And so if your child is appearing a bit anxious or unhappy during that time, perhaps spend some time to talk with them. And I think just to ride on with the question we asked earlier on about when the child doesn't want to speak to someone and what can you do? One thing that we have to realize is that children would sometimes speak with others at their own pace, in the sense that they might not feel like talking today. They might not feel like talking tomorrow, but that one time when they suddenly feel like, I want to talk to someone, then they will. So if you ask them the first time and they don't answer, doesn't necessarily mean that they're rejecting outright or never going to talk to you. Just give them time, give them patience, all the time that they need, and just one day, if he or she, your child, sees that you want to talk, you want to interact, he or she will eventually, hopefully, open up to you and tell you what's been going on as well.
That. Anyone else got anything to add in addition? Okay, so next we've got a poll question for you, our audience. So VJ, if we could have our poll question. So the question is, or the statement rather, I feel comfortable talking to my child about mental health. We'll just wait for those answers to come in. quite positive, actually. The majority of people agree or strongly agree that they feel comfortable talking to their child, talking to their teen about mental health, which is great. And that's why we do these webinars, to upskill you, our community, and do it with our students as well, to kind of upskill them and open this dialogue and open this conversation. We've got one final question, and then I really would welcome any additional questions in the Q&A box. So our final question is, there are so many professionals out there. Who does what, and who do I turn to for help?
I think that is a great question, because there's a plethora, no end of qualified professionals in Hong Kong. And it's important to understand that they all have different training, different backgrounds, different approaches. And I think that all of them have validity. And again, we have to think about, what is your child like? Some children love artwork and hate words. They probably do more well with an art therapist than trying to go to a traditional talk therapist. And other people, kids, they don't like words or art, but they love exercise. You know, there are therapists who'll get out there and walk with your child and just let them flow into that talking state. So I think, and those are two extremes. But even when it comes down to the style of thinking, whether it's the cognitive behavioral therapy, psychotherapy, psychoanalytic approach, they're all slightly different in the way they work, and they require different cognitive skills of the child. And depending on the age, they may not quite be there yet developmentally. So we do have to be careful when we're looking at professionals. Look at their training. I would suggest everyone go up and look at what professional membership do they have. A lot of certifications now in cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, a lot of different professional backgrounds really demand a high level. And if you want to be a membership of the Hong Kong Psych Soc, the Australian Psych Soc, British, you have to jump through a lot of hoops, and you have to agree to good ethics. So it's a nice place to start when you're looking at paring down, who would I like to choose? And then looking at that modality they work within. Do they feel okay using toys, tools, drawing? Are they pure talking? And then I think finally I would just narrow it down to let your child meet them. If they didn't like them, nothing else matters. They really have to be willing to work with them. Yeah, but I know everyone's got some good thoughts on this one. But I just think it's great that already over half of the parents, nearly 2/3 of parents are really happy talking about this mental health piece. So it sounds like you're all well placed to do this little piece of research first.
Calvin, I have to apologize in advance, but I would have to say everyone use Calvin and the team. The school as that resource can really take away that sort of overwhelming and daunting task of trying to figure out what everybody does and what the fit is. So sorry, Calvin.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I think that's great. Yeah. So I think, yeah, if you're unsure, I think like what Dr. Scarlett said, and also what Stephanie said also, just do research, go online and see. There are loads of different resources and counselors and therapists out there that you can look for. And obviously, I'm available as well. I can kind of help in that research process and point you towards the direction that, find someone that might fit your child, that your child could work with or work together with as a family as well. Yeah.
Dr. Keith, can I go to you with this in particular? Some parents express maybe concerns about medication, etc. At what point does it get to you as a psychiatrist?
I was mute. Sorry. Answering the question earlier about which doctor or therapist to see. I think Scarlett made a great point about look up their credentials, look up their training. This is a bit harder with us doctors, purely because of medical council rules, we're not allowed to advertise ourselves, and so therefore we are not literally allowed to put a lot of stuff online about where we're going to training, what kind of credentials that we have. We only have the professional ones, but it's harder to find more information about us. So I agree with Scarlett in saying that, meet with the doctor, see what they're like, whether or not the child feels comfortable talking to them, whether or not they think on the same channel, speak the same language, that kind of stuff. And maybe just read what this doctor has written online. Sometimes we write newspaper articles or health articles to let people learn a bit more about us. So that's also useful. Going back to your question about medications, I think with all guidelines, especially with mood and anxiety problems, us doctors try not to give out medications if we can. We all recognize that, especially with children, they're growing, they might be susceptible to more side effects. And so therefore, if it's a mild form of mood disturbance or anxiety, we try our best to hand over to therapists, counselors, to do a more psychological approach to help them first. There are, of course, instances whereby medications are useful. So for example, if the child is experiencing a depression or anxiety to such an extent that it is really affecting their behavior, or that they really had really serious suicidal thoughts, for example, and that they physically can't even get up to go to school or fail to fall asleep, then in such instances, yes, perhaps medications do help. Other things, if we talk about just child mental health, for example, ADHD, in some cases, medications do really help to help them focus, to be less distracted, and to help them listen better and be more motivated. The best approach is always a combination of the two, medications and psychological therapy, which I'm sure everyone here nodding their heads will agree with me saying this as well. And so therefore, medications is something that we don't want to do, and we want to give out liberally, but it's just that there are instances whereby we have to, and that it is better that the child takes them earlier rather than later, so they don't have to suffer for any longer as well.
Thank you for that. And we've got a question in the chat, Michael, that I'd like to direct at you if possible, because I know you've done previous parent webinars around this. Our parents asked, how would you start a conversation about substance abuse, alcohol or others?
Remember my microphone. Okay. So yes, great question. So again, like everything else we were talking about, kind of bringing it up with this normalizing or destigmatizing it, and to have an open dialogue about these. So obviously there are things that may, if you're watching a television program together, or it comes up organically in a conversation, maybe one of their friends has gotten in some kind of trouble or something, is those are entryways or points, where you can open the conversation naturally and normally. So this has come up, well, how do you feel, about drugs or alcohol? Are you, sort of, is this going on around your school or in your peer group? And let's have a discussion about that, or how do you feel about that? So I think, again, I know we talk about some of the same things, some of the repetitive phrases about sort of normalizing things, and having a discussion about it is not going to put the idea in their head. Like, they know about weed, and they know about vaping, and they know about alcohol. And so discussing it openly and freely is actually, helpful. So sometimes, parents want to know if the child comes home, is obviously somehow impaired, at what point do you have this conversation? If you're finding sort of paraphernalia in their room, or you actually find substances in their room, if they're physically impaired or cognitively impaired. So I would suggest that, personally, that maybe that would not be the best time that they're receptive to that information to have that discussion, and maybe the next morning, because you're hyper, your emotional system is hyper responsive at that point. So you're not going to be in your own best headspace to have the discussion. And if they're sort of impaired, they're not going to be in the best space to hear it. So generally, that's sort of my guidelines. I would send this over to Scarlett, because I know Scarlett knows a lot about this area. So if you have some opinion about that as well, I'd be eager to hear your thoughts.
Oh, thanks, Michael. I think everything that you've said there is absolutely spot on. I mean, these are such important pieces to have open discussions, and you're right, waiting for the right time. I think that is one critical piece that a lot of parents kind of miss, because they've got ire. My child's a what? And when they don't need much information. Our brains are designed to pick up, what's happening in the person across from us, even in a slightly disabled adult brain. They're still picking up, clues as to my mom is mad at me. Whoa, yeah. And that only thing that's going to do is put up a defense mechanism. Yeah. So some of the best times is just say what you see, and then put a pin in it. And we are going to talk about this tomorrow morning. I totally agree with that approach, but let them know you see it, and you smell it, or whatever else, and that we are going to address it. And I think the other important point is that the teenagers, the young budding adults. So we have to, as parents as well, and it's a hard shift, we have to move out of the parent-child dyad, where we've got them being little people that we're telling off, because that's the part of their brain that we're tapping into. And as a parent, adult, whatever, teachers, etc., we've got to realize we've got to speak to the future adult at some point. And engaging that side of their brain can be actually quite powerful. I know that with addictions research, there's a lot around intrinsic motivation. And I tried to point some parents to this, and they came back and they said, great, how do I improve their intrinsic motivation for change? I'm like, you don't do it. It has to happen in them. But what we do is we listen carefully for what would they like. So if we say, oh, but my friends think it's cool, I say, okay, so how do you feel this morning? I've got a bit of a hangover. So the only thing we stay with is, what would they like to see different? And all the bits that make it cool or whatever, we don't repeat those words, okay? So pretty much when you stay on, and we call it gathering flowers, and then you just give them back a bouquet. That's one of the phrases that we have in motivational interviewing. So you just pick the bits that, oh, so you know you shouldn't, so you know you'll have a hangover. Okay, what do you think you'll do next time? And sometimes challenging that brain to develop a new rubric, which is what it needs to do, is a healthier option. And it's you're fighting your own fear, as Michael said, and it's built in our system as parents. And we have no off button. Unfortunately, we haven't figured out where it is. So how is our team going to figure out where it is? But I think with that in particular, with young people, it's important. But we have to consider the modeling that we're doing too. I'll just add that one in. If we're enjoying a few extra glasses of wine because it's locked down, yeah, it's got to be careful.
Just writing up on Scarlett's point about the motivation interviewing, it's right in saying that intrinsic motivation needs to come from their own thoughts, their own beliefs. So, for example, if the child says that he had a drink last night and then had a hangover this morning, in motivation interviewing, we kind of magnify that one point, to magnify that one bad part that this child has mentioned themselves and what is bad about drinking. And then once we magnify it about that, then the next time they do it, they can easier to recall what is wrong about drinking, how they felt thereafter. And so therefore, that's how we motivate them to stop drinking as well. The one thing I just want to add, maybe it's because I worked in the substance abuse team in the past. And so those who I saw in the substance abuse were kind of really heavy drinkers, or really, they also not only had a substance abuse problem, they also had some mood disorders. And this applies to both children and adults. Sometimes people abuse substances, especially those who are heavily dependent. That's only just a symptom. The alcohol or the substance is the symptom of an underlying problem. It could be that they have some deep-rooted mood problem, some deep-rooted fear or anxiety over something, and they're using alcohol or substance as an escape. And so without looking deeper into what the actual core problem is, and just merely banning people from drinking or doing drugs isn't actually going to stop them, or it's actually going to help them from the core problem as well. So I know we talked a lot about hearing your child, talk to them, understand what they're talking about, understand their problems. That is actually the crux of the problem as well. So I think that's really important, just to understand what's really troubling them.
I'll just add one more point, because I think that's so critical, is say, what does it do for you and what does it take away? It's usually mitigating something else. Yeah.
Okay, and we've got another question in the chat. So a parent said, as a parent of a child with anxiety, I'm finding it a challenge to encourage them to revise for their exams without adding to their mental load. So is that right, about how to find that balance between pushing them enough but not pushing them too much? Who would like to lead on that one? It's a tricky one.
I'll start off by just leading off on intrinsic motivation. I think the schedules that we talked about earlier can be a safe way to do it. And with some students with extreme anxiety, the best way is that they create it and then they come and check in with the parent, as opposed to the parent checking on them. It's been one way that's quite successful, because the child has produced the agenda, is going to follow through with it. We give them all the best chunking of time methods, as long as they're doing all the good stuff. We can't reduce their anxiety about a naturally anxiety producing situation. I think that might be an unreasonable thing to ask for. but showing that you'll be their partner and you'll be their check-in and their not their cheerleader. They might not want that, yeah. Yeah, but that could be one start.
And I don't know if we want to get back to the sort of checking your expectations. You know, I think I have yet to meet a young person in this educational environment that is not acutely aware of the demands of their teacher, right? They're not missing, there's no missing of the plot. They know what's going on. And I think even sometimes, you know, you think your child's not motivated or not as motivated as the next kid, but right now it's just so hard for them to carve out that time to still study and do that coursework online after sitting on the computer all day. So yeah, getting back to maybe finding that space for them to release themselves from the, you know, bind of the instruction online, to, you know, get that behavioral activation, get that mood boosted, and then give them that time. You know, it's a tricky one though. It's so tricky.
Very much. And there's no additional questions in the chat. So any last questions? Yeah, Claire, go ahead.
There's one last question that's come in, and it's from a parent whose daughter recently joined the school, but her daughter's finding that she's struggling to find someone that she can connect with. Should this parent be worried about this, and what can this parent do to help her?
I jump in first. I would say, you know, I in the medical room, I have a lot of students come to me at break time or lunchtime because they feel like there's nowhere else to go. And I know obviously starting school when you're online is really tough. It's really, really difficult. How can you kind of make connections with friends when you're just seeing faces and you've never actually met them? But I think at school, we've got a huge CAS activity program, some of which obviously we're unable to do, but some CAS is restarting again. So I'd really encourage them to kind of find their group, find their thing that they're interested in, whether it's music or reading or drama, whatever it is, and reach out to that club. Join that group and start some kind of conversations with people who have similar interests, and friendships will blossom and develop from there.
And it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we do have parents as well that will say, oh, my child's very quiet, they're very shy, you know, I'm concerned about that. Should I be worried that they're not somebody that seems initially extrovert or outgoing? I just wondered if any of the panel have any advice, if they feel that their child is particularly quiet or does keep themselves to themselves.
I have a quick thought about that. I think given that we know that there's different personalities, and we know that some people will be shy and retiring and a little bit more introverted, and I think we have to be careful to not pathologize that and try and understand our child and honor it if they are a quiet person. So finding quiet activities with like-minded individuals might be an easier route. A photography club, knitting. I don't know what's a quiet activity actually. We all know the knitting circles can get quite heated. So in the mahjong room, you know, so maybe it's about finding the activity that suits her as opposed to worrying about people, which could be a bit nebulous. And speak more to what would make her feel accepted. I think that might be a different approach, because that's probably something she needs to enunciate. And I think it also depends on the year group as well. If she's year 7, of course she's shy anyway. It's a hard transition year. If she's year 13, wow, that's a tough one too. But anywhere in between, there's some room for something. Just a first thought.
The only thing I just want to add on, maybe it's because from a medical point of view, what I worry the most is often is if the child is someone who used to be quite talkative and quite extroverted, and there's a sudden change in character, that's when I start to see wonder what's wrong. Sometimes for children with anxiety or depression, they don't tell you that they're unhappy or they tell you that they're anxious. They just keep to themselves and not talk. And if there's such a marked departure from their previous character and their previous behavior, then that's something that's worth noting as well. It's always the changes that we're also always a bit aware and sort of want to know a bit more about.
I think that's a really good point, Keith. Thank you. And I just want to reinforce again, like Saffron said, and Calvin, we are here as a school, so please do reach out to us and contact us if you are concerned about your child and the connections that they're making. And to remember that if your child has joined us over the last 2 years and transitioning during a time of online and in school, it has had its challenges. So I think it's just that, you know, patience, cultivating and really small steps, and working with your child on that, and working with us.
And that brings us to a close. So we've covered a lot in the past hour. Thank you so much to our panel for giving up their time this evening and sharing your knowledge and expertise with our community. Parents, thank you for joining the webinar. We were so pleased to offer this parallel session with the session that was delivered to students this afternoon. So hopefully this will help kind of stimulate conversation and dialogue about mental health at home. We value your feedback. So as you leave the webinar, please do feel free to leave your comments. And thank you again. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye, thanks.